And I am here. Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate. And we have a special guest, John C. Wright, star of stage and screen. Wait, no, I read that wrong. It's page and screen. He writes books and a blog. So say hello, Nate.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
And John, Mr. Wright.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
And we are here tonight to discuss the Robert E. Howard poem, "The One Black Stain." And I was going to let Mr. Wright lead off. I wanted to make one initial comment, and then I'll see how he wants to start us off. I started doing a poetry series on YouTube, memorizing and performing poetry, trying to put a little verve into it. And I started doing that partly because I think it is absolutely inexcusable how poetry is being taught in our schools these days, and what impression, a lot of people, and especially young men, have of poetry. And I was trying to present something different, and honestly, I think this is probably the most out there of the ones I have done. The very, not the kind of style or subject matter that most people think of when you think of, formal rhyming poetry. So, having said that, Mr. Wright, would you like to lead off with anything?
Well, I'd like to lead off by reading the poem, in case your listeners don't have it memorized. May I?
That's fine.
This is going to be me with my oratorical voice. One Black Stain, first published in the Howard Collector number 2, spring of 1962. So this was collected after his death, as far as I can tell. They carried him out on the barren sand, where the rebel captains die, where the grim gray rotting gibbets stand, as Magellan reared them on the strand, and the gulls that haunt the lonesome land wail to the lonely tide. Already messed up one line. It's wail to the lonely tide. Drake faced them all like a lion at bay, his line head up flung. Dare ye my word of law defy, to say this traitor shall not die? And his captains dared not meet his eye, but each man held his tongue. Solemn Kane stood forth alone, a grim man of sober face. Worthy of death he may well be, but the trial ye held was a mockery. Ye hid your spite in a travesty, where justice hid her face. More of the man had ye been on deck, your sword to cleanly draw, in forthright fury from its sheath, and openly cleave him to the teeth, rather than slink and hide beneath the hollow word of the law. Hell rose in the eyes of Francis Drake. Puritan knave, swore he. Headsman, give him the axe instead. He shall strike off yon traitor's head. Solomon folded his arms and said, darkly and somberly, I am no slave for your butcher's work. Bind him with triple strands, Drake roared, and then the men obeyed, hesitantly as if afraid, but Kane moved not as they took his blade and pinioned his iron hands. They bent the doomed man over to his knees, the man who was to die. They saw his lips in a strange smile bend. One last long look they saw him send at Drake, his judge, and his one-time friend, who dared not meet his eye. The axe flashed silver in the sun. A red arch slashed the sand. A voice cried out as the head fell clear, and the watchers flinched in sudden fear, though 'twas but a seabird wheeling near above the lonely strand. This be every traitor's end, Drake cried, and yet again. Slowly his captains turned and went, and the admiral's stare was elsewhere bent, than where with cold scorn, with anger blent, in the eyes of Solomon Kane. Night fell on the crawling waves. The admiral's door was closed. Solomon lay in the stenching hold. His irons clashed as the ship rolled, and his guard, grown weary and overbold, laid down his pipe and dozed. He woke with a hand at his corded throat that gripped him like a vice. Trembling, he yielded up the key, and the somber Puritan stood... Excuse me, this is great. And the somber Puritan stood free, his cold eyes gleaming murderously with the wrath that is slow to rise. Unseen, to the admiral's door went Solomon Kane from the guard. Through the night and silence of the ship, the guard's keen dagger in his grip, and no man of the dull crew saw him slip through the door unbarred. Drake at the table sat alone, his face sunk in his hands. He looked up as from sleeping, but his eyes were blank with weeping, as if he saw not creeping death's swiftly flowing sands. He reached no hand for gun or blade to halt the hand of Kane, nor even seemed to hear or see, lost in black mists of memory. Love turned to hate and treachery, and bitter, cankering pain. A moment Solomon Kane stood there, the dagger poised before. As a condor stoops above a bird, and Francis Drake spoke not nor stirred, and Kane went forth without a word and closed the cabin door. I messed up a few lines. If this was a professional recording, I'd have to do those again, but man, it's a good poem.
It's it's kind of funny. When I first started working on this one, I didn't think too much about it. It was just a relatively simple story put in poetic form. But the more time I've spent with it, the more I like it and the more I'm finding there. So it's I'm fine. Yeah, it's a very interesting story.
Well, if you could tell me the secret of how Robert E. Howard, in just a few lines or with just a turn of phrase, makes a man seem so menacing and a situation so deadly, and you're so sure that people are going to die, I would like to know, because I want to put that in my stories too. I haven't quite got the knack of it.
Yeah, he does have a very remarkable economy of action, and also, I like how he leaves kind of open, at least in this poem, how your vision of Solomon Kane. He's just a big, dark faced, really scary dude that nobody wants to mess with. Just basically telling the captain, hey, look, no, this is a punk move. I mean, fight the guy or let him go, but what's this? Don't bring the law into what you're trying to do here.
But he shows you everything you need to know about Solomon Kane's character, and he's got immense character because he clearly believes in justice and truth. He's clearly merciless. He's a killer, but he also what does that end mean when he decides not to kill the guy, even though the guy is clearly in the wrong? Well, it looks to me. I mean, you can interpret the poem any way you like, but it looks to me like Drake was weeping for a guy who had been his friend, and whether or not he was actually a traitor or whether or not he made a punk move, that's not as clear as it could be. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? It looks like it could just be regret.
You get is that
deep regret and guilt for what he had done, but it could be that he still felt he had to do it. But Solomon Kane, who is there to kill him, he's like the angel of death. Lets him live, spares him.
Yeah. I think he figures that Drake was, flagellating himself enough because, it shows that, clearly he's not being all self-righteous here. He has thought through the consequences of his action. He's like, wow, I just killed my friend.
Yeah.
And it tore him up. And so Kane relented, seeing that, well, the punishment he's going to give himself for the rest of his life in this, that cankering pain, it's probably going to hurt him more than this keen dagger in the ribs,
Yeah. Kane is also a religious character, so he might have wanted the guy to make his peace with God instead of just killing him then and there. You know what I'm saying? He might have wanted to give him some time to pray, say his prayers.
Yeah. It actually reminds me a little bit of the scene from Hamlet, when Hamlet's sneaking up to the king's bedroom, and he sees the king there apparently praying, and he's like, "Oh, I can't kill." Although in that one, the motives are almost entirely opposite.
Yeah, Hamlet wants Claudio to go to hell, so he doesn't want to stab him while he's praying. He wants to wait until he's in bed with a whore or drinking or in his cups or gambling. And then the moment Hamlet spares him and the angel of death passes the king by, the king says, "My thoughts fly up, but my words remain below." Excuse me, below. He says it the other way around. He says, "My words fly up and my thoughts remain below, and words without thoughts never to heaven go." So the king just says, if only Hamlet had known he was praying in vain. The king has no religious feeling in his heart at that time. So the illusion, the illusion first spares Claudio's life. But this here in this poem, there's no illusion. That guy Drake is crying by himself, and he lifts no hand to defend himself. It's like he welcomes the dagger of Kane.
There's and for those who are unaware of this, by the way, a little context. This poem is actually based on a real historical incident in which Sir Francis Drake, who was leading a flotilla. I'm not sure the proper word. He was leading.
Oh, I just said flotilla.
But he was leading several ships in an expedition that its purpose is kind of still argued about a little bit, but it was most likely privateering to some degree, at least. And he had Sir Thomas Doughty executed at the same spot where Magellan had some mutineers hung. And then why Sir Thomas Doughty was executed and what the circumstances were is kind of foggy. And it's there's an account by Drake's nephew, I believe, that tries to paint Sir Francis Drake as almost like saintly mercifulness. And then there's another account that you know, puts it a little more cynically. But you know, one thing that no one argues about is that these two actually were friends. And so at some point before things obviously went pretty badly wrong. And
that's putting it mildly.
Nate, I'm afraid I might have to have you executed next week. I'm sorry. It's just a thing.
About that, of the two of us, I'm the more heavily armed, so do what you must, I suppose. I will take the hat off the end of my shotgun for this.
I am more of a Second Amendment theorist. You are a practitioner, yes. So some context.
But this was worse because this was allegedly an abusive process. At least according to the poem, it was someone misusing the instrumentality of the law because he was the captain.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they kind of, you know, that was controversial back in those days when he returned to port. You know, he got into some trouble for all this because, yeah, it's dubious. You know, he was really stretching sort of his own stated authority here, but it set the precedent for, you know, the ship's captain is the absolute power on the ship when it's at sea. Yeah. You know, this is really the thing that cemented it that, you know, the law be damned. What the captain wants goes because there's no higher power out here other than God himself.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that was where the captain's absolute authority comes from. That precedent? It's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, it's this is one of the sort of defining moments where that really became the ideas. What kind of what I'd read about.
Do either you gentlemen know where the venue was? Was this in Patagonia? Was this in South America where Magellan saw the giants, or where he where was it in the ocean?
Other than that, this actually the real event actually did take place where Magellan had some mutineers hung, which would have been somewhere in the New World, island or mainland. I don't know.
Okay.
The best I got out of this is that it was near the water.
But
I'm always fascinated with Magellan because he allegedly saw giants in South America. When other sailors went back there, they didn't see them. And the character of Setebos, who is the god worshipped by Caliban in The Tempest, in the Prospero story, Setebos actually was the name of the god of the Patagonians that Magellan wrote down. So Shakespeare didn't make up that name; he just borrowed it.
But Nate, in case you were unaware, part of the reason he was probably interested in that point. Mr. Wright you still are a lawyer, just not a practicing one. Is that correct?
My bar membership lapsed years ago, so no, I'm not officially a lawyer anymore. Yeah, I'm a failed lawyer.
He has studied and practiced law by his own.
Wikipedia article earlier and was like, filtering for slander. Probably it was still very interesting.
Oh, did they slander it up again? My brother wrote the Wikipedia article, and then the rabid puppies came on and excuse me, not the rabid puppies. They were on my side. The puppy haters came on and slandered me because they decided that I was double plus ungood. That was an annual.
No, it seemed pretty even-handed. I just always, want to say a little bit of my own defense when I cite Wikipedia as a source for anything. Like, yeah, read
I always
Wikipedia.
tell my kids that the internet is the web of lies. So you can trust it about as well as you could trust walking up to a random person on a Manhattan street corner and saying, "Hey, completely random person, do you know about the War of 1812?" And they'll go, "Oh yeah." So.
Yeah, that was in that was World War I, wasn't it?
That was in 1492.
Regrettably, that's fairly accurate today. What was so one point, and this isn't specifically about this poem, but about the general character of Solomon Kane. I find it fascinating, just his name, what Robert Howard did with that. Because he has two biblical names. There's Solomon and there's Kane. And so in this one person, he has, wisdom and, murderous hate and violence. And, so this character is these two things put together, which is just the name is is brilliant. I admire his work there.
It's great. I read the collection of short stories that was called The Moon of Skulls, I think it was, where a number of the main Solomon Kane stories appeared. And the thing I thought was fascinating about the character is, theologically, he doesn't talk much like a real Puritan. Solomon Kane talks a lot more like Conan does, by which I mean he seems to think that the earth is immensely old and was occupied by primordial pre-human monstrosities before the coming of mankind. And then in dark places of the world, those monstrosities are still around. I don't know how he would square that with his Puritan background, except for he's run into them. He's run into the vampire queens of Atlantis in the primordial Africa and such. So he's if you've ever read early Doctor Strange comics from the back when he appeared in Marvel Premiere, no one is that old but me, I guess. But they reference some of the bad guys from Solomon Kane books and from the Cthulhu Mythos stuff that Kane runs into. And Kane is not only deadly with his pistols and his Toledo steel blade, but an African shaman gives him a magical stick with a wolf jackal head on top, which can be used to smite and damage ghosts and evil spirits and black clouds of smog that you may have run into when you were playing D&D as a child or last week, depending on whether you're like me or not. And a lot of those D&D monsters also crop up in this same background, in this same source material that he used. And of course, Robert Howard borrowed from himself completely. So Solomon Kane and Conan and Call of Atlantis all appear in the same background universe.
That actually reminds me. I had wanted to say this. I only found and was aware of this poem because I looked up Robert Howard because of the series, the blog series on Castalia House, Appendix N. And I have to say, Jeffro, I think is the name that was published under. And I have to say, while I was not completely unaware of this material, like I had read some of the things on that list on my own, largely owing to that I'm a cheapskate. And so when I was a kid, I would go to used bookstores all the time.
Yeah.
And I would find... And so I would find just all kinds of old stuff. And so some of these things I was already familiar with. But I looked up Robert E. Howard because of Appendix N. And I would highly recommend either looking up that series on the blog or purchasing the book from Castalia House, because the material, like the authors and the material he mentions, are fascinating. And there's a lot there. There's a lot more there than I expected. Partly because, and I found the same thing with Tarzan. Today, what most people are exposed to are like cheap fourth generation copies, and it's not the same character. and it doesn't have the same power and the same, vigor to it as the original material. And so it's I recommend looking up the Appendix N series from Castalia House, and I recommend looking up a lot of these old stories because they are worthwhile.
Appendix N's been gathered into a book, which I bought, and which is entertaining reading. Which is really funny because the author there, he and I are on the opposite side of a generation gap. Because I read all those stories in my youth because they were the only fantasy stories that existed at the time. It was a very small field back in the 60s and 70s, and so if you were a fantasy fan at all, you read everything that was marked as fantasy. And he was reading it because he was trying to read the books that inspired Gary Gygax, who is of an age with me. And of course, Gary Gygax was merely referring to what had commonly been read by everyone who was interested in fantasy and science fiction at the time. And to him, it was an eye opener. To Jeffro, what's his last name? Robertson? I don't remember his last name. I'm embarrassed. I'm trying to help him sell his book, and I can't think of his name.
That's a problem.
But I do recommend his book because basically what he does, he sets himself the task of reading every single book that is listed by Gary Gygax in Appendix N and giving his thoughts about it, both about the work itself and about its effect on Dungeons and Dragons. And to see someone who was completely unfamiliar with an entire world of pulp magazines and pre-Campbellian science fiction and pre-Tolkien fantasy, which was what almost all of that was, is like stepping into another world. I of course, was familiar with it from my youth up. And so it was really weird to see him noticing things that it's like having kids. I saw the same things through new eyes. He was able to identify some of the things that had gone kind of wrong with fantasy. I'm not going to say making it too commercial because I actually approve of commerce, but I'll say there was a lot of bland sort of one ant following another ant and forming a big circle kind of thing that went on with the fantasy in the major publishers in New York back in the old days when they had major publishers in New York and everyone just didn't put their stuff out on the internet. So, well worth a read.
The stranglehold of the elite. All right.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't hear you. Go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah. You got to break the stranglehold of the elite somehow, right?
That is in the process of happening. Praise God. Whether it happens soon enough, I'm still not sure. But Johnson.
Jeffro Johnson, Appendix N: The Literary History of Dungeons and Dragons. That's the name of the book. But I've also posted in the chat a spot where you can look up all of Robert Irvin Howard's poems if you want to expand your poetry reading from great fantasy authors.
I've got to look up. Is there anyone in the chat right now? I don't know. We don't have many viewers. No one right now. Okay.
When are you going to post this on your blog? You can put the link if anyone's interested in looking up some of Robert Howard's other poems.
But so to return more directly to the source material, one thing from the poem I found very interesting is the actual moment of Doughty's execution in this. It feels almost like martyrdom. Because you have this moment where, he's knelt down, they're about to chop off his head, and they see him look at, Francis Drake, and Doughty is smiling, and Drake can't meet his eye. And so there's this moment where, much like this atmosphere must have existed in some of the, martyrdoms of Christianity, where the person being executed is effectively sitting in judgment of the person executing them.
Because they're going to go see God in 10 minutes, so.
That too. And it's, and so I don't believe was Robert Howard a Christian? I'm honestly not sure.
I don't know what his belief was. He certainly didn't. Every mention of organized religion in the Conan stories is always deprecating, is always dismissive. So I think he was probably the same camp as H.P. Lovecraft, but I don't know. I actually don't know what his belief was.
But what was Oi. And I feel like I had something else, but I'm lost for a moment. So someone else, Nate.
I'll jump in with a thought if I may. The moment when Francis Drake can't meet the eyes of the man he's about to have executed reminds me of a Japanese story I heard once, and I'll try to tell it, but I'm going to tell it badly because I know I've forgotten a major part of it. There is a Buddhist priest who spoke of a certain type of strength called spiritual strength or spiritual authority, that a famous samurai was so offended at the idea that there could be something stronger than the strength of the samurai, stronger than the sword, that he went to go kill the guy. And when he walked in, the priest raised no hand to defend himself, but merely arrayed himself in his priestly robes and sat there and met his eye and stared at the guy. And the guy drew his sword, and the priest did not flinch. And the samurai's hand shook, and he and with damp and downcast looks, he retreated and then bowed and acknowledged that there was such a thing as a spiritual strength that's greater than physical strength. Because of course he couldn't bring himself to kill an innocent man, and a man of greater, whatever the quality is, of greater spiritual authority than he had. There's something like that there. The guy's conscience makes him weak. That's why he can't defend himself against Kane when Kane breaks in.
Yeah, it reminds me.
But it's also why Kane spares him, right?
Yeah. So it reminds me a bit of sort of the opening scene of the Song of Ice and Fire, which I'm so done with that. They killed everybody I like.
Well,
I read all the books published so far, and I don't care anymore.
Fortunately,
it's turned into Sean's audience and other future folks. Please forgive me for that. It's turned into a land asshole. I don't care anymore.
You mean the opening scene where it's just he introduces a character who is never to be met again, who is you find out about his reason for being beyond the wall. He goes in, he sees some of the otherlings, and they slaughterize him. Or do you mean the opening scene with chapter 1?
Yeah, the opening scene where they are like they're getting ready to execute the guy.
Oh, okay, that's
so they hand him the big greatsword. Ned Stark is like, hey, he has his sons right there watching him kill this deserter, and he's like, remember, any man you sentence to death, you kill with your own hand. If you're gonna take a man's life, you're gonna carry it. Don't says it's a weakness to pawn this off on others. And you'll note, not only does Drake have a headsman, he didn't want to kill him in open combat or behead him himself. He tries to sub-delegate, like use this death as a punishment. Like, okay, fine, Kane, you wanna talk back? You're gonna kill him. And Kane just says, I'm not gonna do that.
And notice that Kane finds that more reprehensible than if he had merely killed the man in anger, because that at least would have been manly. That at least would have been honest, straightforward, even if it still would have been a wicked deed. But to demean the law, it's sort of like how in the Bible Christ never gets mad at anyone except for Pharisees, except for people who are given a special trust that they have to carry out that has a holy purpose. And of course, to a man like Solomon Kane, the law, justice is holy. He's an angel of vengeance.
Well, and the other thing, to refer to Jesus and why he got so angry at the Pharisees is that they, in one sense, they were breaking one of the most important of the 10 Commandments. Don't take God's name in vain. Don't attach God's name to a cause which is not His. And don't make up a list of your 20 or 50 rules and say, oh, by the way, and God said this.
Speaking as a failed lawyer, one of my favorite laws is one that's almost never enforced, which is if you abuse the process of the law, you're supposed to be punished. That means if you sue someone and you don't actually have a case and you're just doing it to waste their money or to threaten them, you should get jail time for that. And that rule is almost never enforced. And if it were enforced, we'd see a lot less frivolous lawsuits, and the law itself would be held in higher regard. Right now,
and also the Trump administration would be having quite a bit less trouble.
Well, I believe the Democratic Party just sued the entire universe for losing the election because they were mad at fate. I didn't realize the Norns could come and you could sort of process on them, but
that seems like a risky plan.
Just be careful with that. They tend to have a brand of power that goes beyond.
Right. There's a higher law. And notice also in the poem, that's what Solomon Kane is serving. He's consistently serving the higher law. See, he certainly respects the captain. He's willing to obey. He doesn't fight the men who arrest him when they tie him up. Okay? He respects the captain's authority. Even when the captain's abusing it, but then he decides to go kill the guy because it's too much. See? But in the name of once again the higher law, because the captain has to answer to the justice of the sea.
Well,
and
he wouldn't want to fight the guys that have been ordered to take him because they don't want to. They're just following orders. He's like, look, I'm not going to, make a massacre on this beach against you guys. I'm going to bide my time, break out of whatever the heck they tied me up with, and then go shank the captain personally.
Well, and the other point about his not resisting arrest effectively is that if at that moment he had fought, it would have, at least dramatically, it would have appeared to be about him and about his own freedom and his own dignity.
Right.
And to him, that wasn't the point. The point was, there is a higher law that must be enforced. I plan to take care of that, but I'm not the point here.
Yeah. And what I like about the poem is I can't remember the last time you mentioned a Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin. I don't remember any of the characters in that before I stopped reading it, inspiring me with a sense of where I would go, that guy has character and I want to be like him. See, I occasionally felt sorry for guys like Lannister the Dwarf, or some guy who's just had his father slaughtered or something. But I don't remember that sense of admiration, of almost hero worship, which came over me when I read about Solomon Kane, who is a guy of absolutely sterling character, absolutely fearless, integrity, and a bloodthirsty murderer. So the wise murderer that Zach Log mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Well, and the other, I was just going to say, if we're talking about other fantasy epics, I do want to throw in one which actually has a current running fantasy epic which actually has admirable characters, or at least characters who are trying for some kind of moral standard. And Stormlight Archives. Excellent story so far, and I am very eager to see where it's going. I'm not sure if I would have. I'm not sure if I would have figured this out if I hadn't known it previously. But knowing it already, I can definitely see the influences of Mr. Sanderson's Mormonism. I think, but it's a fantastic story. So. So again, back to the poem, because we go all over the place, which is the way these discussions have been going.
All discussions go that way, son.
I did think the moment where Kane said, this is absolutely wrong, you shouldn't be doing this, and
he's the only one who says it. And he's the only one who says it. Everyone else just sits there looking at their shoes. Sorry, pardon me for interrupting.
But and Drake's response is, you know what, you're gonna do this. Like, that is a grade A level evil overlord there. Like, You can't execute this man, this is wrong, he's gonna do it now.
Yeah, you kill him.
Yep.
What is this, a gang initiation?
Yeah, it actually is.
Hey Vito, get over here. We found this dirty rat talking to the cops. You're new here. Unproven.
It's the idea.
Hand him the chop.
It's the idea of shared guilt. If you can get someone to commit a crime in the name of the cause, then his loyalty is bound to the cause.
Yeah. But I think what you're saying, what you were saying earlier, or Mr. Wright, about the this sort of intense admiration for Solomon Kane, and his character and all that you don't get out of, like the Song of Ice and Fire is, I think, partly a function of words. Like I said, we get, a handful of words about Solomon Kane that's just like these big, fierce.
I've read other stories.
He's strong.
He was in. I mean, I'm familiar with the character. I've read other stories besides this poem, so.
Well, that's good.
I mean, it's not. I'm saying
in that case, you have a deeper appreciation for him than I do.
All I'm saying is my reaction is based on more than just the poem. So I'm reading things from outside sources. If that makes sense.
Okay, I got you.
But yeah, I just think the sparse economy of the way he describes things is true in all of his writing, in all of Robert E. Howard's writing. He's masterful. It's almost the opposite of the kind of fluid purple prose of something like Robert E. Howard or Clark Ashton Smith, who I think, by the way, is lyrical. I enjoy the man's poetical turn of phrase, but Robert E. Howard reminds me of a guy named Keith Laumer. They're both very good at getting to a rather quick, masculine, straightforward prose style. It's not as pared down and sparse as Robert Heinlein, who was almost Hemingway. He almost has nothing in terms of adjective or descriptions or anything like that. I can't think of how to describe a single Robert Heinlein character except for maybe the mother thing or the fuzzy ball from the Red Planet. And sometimes you don't even know what skin color the guys are because no one's described. And Heinlein did that on purpose as a as sort of a commentary. But this guy, just in a few words to create such a striking image, is quite admirable. I, of course, in my particular method of writing, try to use 1,000 words, and usually they're $50 words too. So it's so my comment is what we lawyers call a statement against interest. I'm admiring something I can't I can't do myself.
So I actually don't know. And I am kind of curious about this because it seems like if you poke around a little bit, most fiction writers have also done some poetry, even if they, don't talk about it much. So have you written anything, Mr. Wright, or no?
I've written poems that appear in books when I had to make up like a poem that a character came across, but I haven't actually written poetry myself for the sake of poetry. No.
Okay, I was just curious about that.
But I'll mention two of them. There's a poem that appears in my Nightland short story about a little girl talking to a mother, and the mother's going to kill her before she's eaten by the soul eaters, so her soul can be reincarnated rather than contaminated, and which is a rather dark theme. And there's a prophetic poem that appears in the my Evernest books, my Last Guardian of Evernest. But that's about it, But I will also point out that Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, and Clark Ashton Smith were also poets in their own right, and poetry was more well regarded in those days. G.K. Chesterton wrote poetry, C.S. Lewis, and so did J.R.R. Tolkien. So it was fairly commonplace for men of letters to try their hand at poetry back in the day. Nowadays, it's rather rare.
Well, and that's part of what I was talking about. Part of why I started doing these series of poems and discussions of the same, because as far as I can tell, it's largely been taken over by the worst people possible to have it, and it's
the poetry world or the fantasy world.
The poetry.
Okay, I agree.
To use the somewhat political terminology, poetry as it exists today is almost completely SJW converged, and that is sad beyond words. Because, I've memorized and I could recite G.K. Chesterton's Lepanto.
I just read that to my kids this Sunday for part of their Sunday reading.
And it's like give me a second. There's so much
My wife can recite the poems out of Tolkien.
I haven't read any of his outside of the books, and outside of the novels, and I should, because I know he's.
I think he put his best ones in the novels myself. So, but he did write some outside. But Chesterton's, you should also memorize the Ballad of the White Horse, but that might strain your memory because that's rather long. There's a poem by Clark Ashton Smith, which is a personal favorite of mine, but I can't recommend it to anyone because it's really long. It's ridiculously long. It's called The Hashish Eater, which is maybe the worst title I've ever heard for any poem, because there's no hashish in the poem and no one eats any. His original title for it was The Apocalypse of Evil, which I think is a much more striking name to the poem.
It is also it is also a much more Pulp Fiction name. You can see that splashed across the cover of Weird Tales. The Apocalypse of Evil, and some bizarre creature looming over a scantily clad woman, while an astronaut is rushing up to save her.
Who was put into the story in order to get the cover art? Because it would. So it opens. Let me give you the opening line. Bow down, I am the Emperor of Dreams. I crown me with the million-colored sun of secret worlds incredible, and take their trailing skies for vestment when I soar, throned on the mounting zenith, and illume their spaceward flown horizons infinite. It's blank verse. It doesn't rhyme, but it's he's copying that from Milton.
There's also there's also one by, I think the name is Frederick Turner. I could have that wrong. I think the title is The New World, and it's a book-length science fiction narrative poem. What's that?
I haven't heard it. Wow. No.
I'll have to see if I have.
Next week.
No, I'm not doing any book-length ones for a while. So far I've topped out with Robert Browning's Child Roland to the Dark Tower Came. That's 200 lines, and that's all I've got. I'm not yet up to Homeric levels of memorization. I might try it. I mean, historically, it's most likely been done. That's most likely how we got some of those. So,
well, if you want the beginning of the Iliad, I've got that memorized too. Meni naede tea peliade Achilles. Okay, never mind.
What was? Speaking of, I talked about this with Nate. If you haven't seen this, you might appreciate this also. Have you seen Mr. Wright? There's a few things on the internet where people have recast the Iliad as a D&D session.
I haven't, but I read DM of the Rings where they recast Tolkien's Lord of the Rings as a D&D session, and it's hilarious. It's hysterical.
And Achilles, they just killed your best friend, and dragged and humiliated him by dragging his body around the city on the back of a chariot. What do? Achilles, I fight everyone. You can't fight everyone. I fight everyone.
Fine,
okay,
roll the dice.
Natural 20. Okay, you cut a swath of blood through the army, leaving a pile of bodies that clogs up the river. I fight the river.
You have to mention that their teeth grip the ground soil. The phrase "they bit the dust" comes from Homer, by the way, to just as a euphemism for death. Their teeth grip the soil. Their armor clanged about them as they fell. And all the death wounds in the Iliad are so exactly described, and they would actually kill you, that some people thought that Homer must have been a battlefield surgeon for the accuracy. Now compare that to the Song of Roland, which is filled with such absurdities as a guy on a horse with a sword cutting a Paynim in half and cracking every single rib as he goes down, and then cutting through his groin and killing the horse under him. That is not a feasible battlefield wound for people with normal human strength. In Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, which is the same character but written centuries later, there's a scene where the mighty knight Orlando, who is basically Superman, or Siegfried, or one of these other invulnerable heroes, Achilles with invulnerable skin, spears a bad guy, spears an enemy knight on the field, and then 5 other ones, like a boy who's hunting frogs with an arrow, threading them one after another on the spear, and with an elegant kind of what's the word? Brevity of exaggeration. The poet then says, lightly he could toss the heavy spear aside. And I'm thinking, wow, yeah, 6 guys in armor, lots of one hand. Yep. Okay.
Like, I thought I saw a scene like that one time in like a Mel Brooks film. Just,
20. I don't think you could get that. I don't think you could get that effect, even if you have great cleave with your spear. No.
Oh, no.
This actually.
So yeah, if you want realism, the camera never blinks when it comes to Homer. He's actually really good, even after all these years. He's quite unmatched.
That actually reminds me of something I wanted to comment on about the One Black Stain, which is what is it? Oh yeah, it's kind of funny, and this also relates to one question I'm trying to figure out, because it looks to me like the primary text for this available online makes a mistake in one of the lines, because I've heard a couple of other readers do this, and in the one line they say "grim man of somber race," which fits better because it also doesn't rhyme face with face. And it's like, come on, you have to be better than that.
The version I saw online said sober face. Face.
That was the main one I've seen, but I've also looked up a couple of other people reading it, and at least 2 of them use the other phrasing. But
well, he's from Massachusetts. I guess it's a somber race.
But they originated in.
Oh no, wait! Excuse me. I'm sorry. He's not from Massachusetts. He's from England. What am I thinking?
Well, it depends if they'd gotten themselves kicked out.
I was confused because I saw a lousy movie that starts with Solomon Kane, tormented by the many times he trafficked with devils in his youth, is in a monastery seeking refuge among the papists. And I thought, did you ever even read? Whoever made the movie, did you actually read any of these stories?
That's on Netflix right now. Actually, I saw it the other day.
I was so thrilled that they finally made a Solomon Kane movie, and I was waiting to see him like in Africa stabbing vampires and stuff. But no.
Well, I've also seen some people commenting on this movie suggesting that it's intended as an origin story, and there should be more coming.
They would have had to make it a good one to get a sequel out of it, though.
Yes,
actually, it's funny because it strikes me as strange that if you're given the source material, that you'd want to copy the thing that made the source material good in order to make the movie good. And maybe I'm just naive as to how hard it is to copy that over. But
it's and the other thing is if he. Not going into that, but anyway.
I mean, Robert E. Howard doesn't make his Christian a very sympathetic character. The guy's a fanatic. Okay, his belief in God is what urges him to murder bad guys.
Well, and
you think even a modern filmmaker could make such a film?
But what I was going with this a minute ago, it's kind of interesting to me that he uses. Especially with that reading, Grim Man of Somber Race, it seems like he uses the same adjectives, the same descriptors, several times for the same people in the same settings, and it's kind of odd because there's 2 ways of looking at this, whether it was done intentionally or not intentionally. Because if it was done intentionally, it actually kind of looks like he was, referring to. The Iliad and the Odyssey, where there are these set things, these set phrases where, whenever he describes the ocean, it's the wine dark sea. Right. And each character has his own...
They're called Homeric epithets.
Yeah.
Hector breaker of horses, or swift Achilles, and so on and so forth. There's a passage it's a book I don't really care for, but it's well written. was called Northern Lights in England. In America, it was called Golden Compass, where there's a fight between bears, and the author, very smoothly moves into a completely Homeric description of the bear fight between their intelligent Panzerbjorn who wear magical armor, and they're clawing away at each other, and it sounds just like Hector and Achilles. It's a great scene. It's a great scene. I wish he had used the author used his great talent for goodness and niceness rather than for evil. He would have been a remarkable author.
I haven't read those largely for ideological reasons, but I from people who have, even people who are Christian as well, I understand it starts out pretty good, and then like books 2 and 3 start to fall apart pretty badly.
Very quickly. Book 1 is an honest to goodness fantasy book that's quite intelligent and well written, and has some good character development, and is only a little soft around the. Well, it's worth reading. I'd actually recommend it to your audience if you have an audience. But the second and third book are simply just not worth the text. I wrote a series of articles a while back, just giving an autopsy of these books, and I just think he reminds me of a card sharp, of a magician who's trying to do a complicated card trick, and then he sneezes, and all the cards of all the plot points he established fly every which way, and things he set up that were supposed to have a payoff don't have any payoff, and some payoffs appear out of nowhere, shrieking, happy ending, or actually in his case, sad ending for no reason. And instead of writing a book the way you're supposed to, which is tricky and backwards, where you find out what the ending is you want first, then you go back to chapter 1 and you mention that the one-eyed man has a glass peg leg and has been drinking acid on the side, so that when you find out, aha, the one-eyed man with the glass peg leg is actually, Hoppy, the one-eyed man, the one-legged man, it's set up. The payoff is set up. Maybe that's the worst possible example I've ever heard of. If you want to have the butler be the murderer, you have to say that there's a butler in chapter 1. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, you figure out, how you want things to be laid at the end. You go back and set up your Chekhov's armory. It's like, I'll lay this gun here, lay this gun over here, drop a little knife action there.
Here's what you don't do. You don't have someone say in chapter 14 of book 3, oh, and by the way, no angel can resist a beautiful woman. They have to come down and try to copulate with us, and then have your beautiful woman stand next to the well of no return that didn't exist before. The well of no return has never been mentioned, and it's the well that the winged angels can't fly out of once they fall into, for some reason. That's only there to kill an angel. And then you have the beautiful girl wave at the angel and go, hey, angel, come to mama. And he immediately stops running World War II, comes over to her, and falls in the well. The end. Happy ending. He's killed. She sacrificed herself for no well set up reason. And the entire Nazi war machine comes to a screeching halt because Rommel's dead. And so there's absolutely nothing. I mean, there's actually nothing that the entire rest of of heaven can do once their main angel's dead, except that angel was a replacement for an earlier angel who died by falling out of bed.
So for an example of this,
they promised me a war in heaven, and I got God falls out of bed and dies. That's what we got to pay off.
So for an example of plot setup done well, by the way, there's and this was one of the things that got me absolutely hooked on Brandon Sanderson's books. One moment, I'll be right back.
We have to talk amongst ourselves. So I think that Puritans are spooky and ought to be more characters and more horror stories because, for one thing, they dress in black and they have buckles on their hats and they sail over oceans to new worlds and stuff, and they're just creepy. In fact, we have a small Puritan here.
That whole kind of mirthless life. I'm like, look, man, I'm from the South. a good shindig and a bunch of cutting up. That's the sauce, man. That's what makes all this other crap we have to eat good.
My favorite thing that the Puritans ever did was outlaw bear baiting. Are you familiar with the sport of bear baiting? It's one of my favorite sports. You heard of it? Mm-hmm. Yes, no. Have you ever heard of bear baiting?
I have.
You tie a bear to a stake, and you release hounds at it one at a time, and you wager on how many dogs the bear will kill before the bear dies of his dog-inflicted wounds. And the reason why the Puritans outlawed this was not because they felt sorry for the animals, but because it was too much fun for the Englishmen. That's the difference between us and God.
The way to go.
And they also outlawed Christmas.
PETA, actually, I think PETA is a Puritan thing. It's like, we don't actually care about the animals. We just hate you.
Well, that's
I believe it's the case. But if you look at the history, the Puritans were the guys who gave rise to the Unitarians and to a number of the political movements in the 60s. So their descendants are still trying to kill all your fun. Now they're just doing it in the name of sexual perversion rather than the name of sexual chastity.
So what I was saying earlier before the next edition of me interrupted, for an example of this kind of plot setup done well, the first books of Brandon Sanderson's I read was the Mistborn trilogy, and he does something just. It's absolutely beautiful when you realize how he sets this up, because he tells you something at the very beginning of book 1, and he repeats it several times throughout the whole thing. And you see you see this over and over again, and by the time you get to book 3, it's just part of this character, and you don't think about it too much. It's just, this is who this is. But and then near the beginning of book 3, he tells you about this other thing. Now, if he'd told you these two things together, you would immediately say, if he told these two things together, you'd immediately say, oh, well, this is clearly this. But by the time you get to book 3, you're not thinking about the first thing he told you. It's just, this will feature this character. And so at the end of book 3, in the climax, when he puts these two things together, you immediately say, oh my God, how did I not see this? It's so obvious. And it's just amazingly well done.
I'm reading Galaxy's Edge at the moment, written by Nick Cole and Jason Anspach. And it's not Shakespeare, but they have really good setup and follow through. They have really good hard hitting, fast action, and I don't know how they could have written it backwards like I recommend, because the books are still coming out. But they have things, they have plot points set up really early on in like chapter 1 of book 1 that have a payoff in book 6 and 7. So those guys must have a giant chart written on butcher paper hung up on the wall that they go by and write in crayon to get their plots worked out ahead of time.
Well, and their murder wall with all the little strings
for who they're going to murder. Yeah. Now I believe George R. R. Martin had one of those, but the strings got to be too many, and he sort of lost track of the wall, I'm afraid.
But the other thing, what was? There is another kind of writer who I haven't read many of his more recent books, but it seems like Neal Stephenson, really fascinating writer, could not write an actual ending to save his life. So, like, the book is fascinating, the world is great, the characters are fun to follow, but like they're really long, and it just reaches a point where it seems like it reaches a point he says where I've got to end this somehow, and he just ends up having a lot of things blow up, and then it's done.
The opening, his early book, the one with the one whose name the main character was hero protagonist, a mafia pizza delivery boy.
Snow Crash.
Snow Crash. How did I forget the name of Snow Crash?
That freaking book was nuts.
It was great. It was totally great. And the ending was actually satisfying. Whereas his next book, The Diamond Age, which you probably noticed I completely ripped off his title for my book, The Golden Age, doesn't really have a proper ending. And the girl, like, goes into work in a brothel at the end. It doesn't make much sense.
Well, it's
I couldn't quite get through System of the World. There was just too many dick jokes for me. I have kind of refined taste when it comes to, if you mention penises more than 18 times in a book, you lost me. So.
Well, the other thing, what was the other thing?
I have delicate pastel feelings like an anime girl from a Japanese cartoon.
Well, the other thing about the Diamond Age, it's odd because the ending is worse than Snow Crash, but at the same time, it was also clearly more obviously planned, because you see other things where you're like, oh, he was setting this up, but at the same time, it's still not. It's less satisfying than just let's blow every single thing up.
Yep.
Oh, and we're gonna have a bunch of messenger kids, like, drag on roller skates, drag a freaking helicopter out of the air.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That was. God, I'm not gonna lie. I have a streak deep down in the bottom of my literary appreciation, which just really likes like crazy stupid crap, like just what is the dumbest action scene you can think of? Nice.
Let me recommend a book called Some Weather by an up-and-coming author.
I think I saw that today on somebody's Wikipedia page.
Well, I will also say there's
you and I think have some tastes in common when it comes to action sequences in books. Some of the best ones I've read recently are by Larry Correia, and his I really appreciate the fact that he's like a gun nut, and every single iota of information about guns is completely accurate in his books. But when he also turned his pen to writing high fantasy, have you guys read his latest and greatest book of the what's it called? That's happened to me again. I want to push someone's book and I can't think of the name. Dark Sword, Dark Sun, Black Assassins, Death of Death. I think it's called the Dark Death. Never mind.
Let's see, Larry Correia book.
Assassins of Blackness.
Oh,
he wrote a fantasy set in this kind of space Hindi dystopia that was just awesome.
Son of the Black Sword.
Son of the Black Sword. Good grief! How could I forget the name? I'm getting old. I'm getting senile. He really stepped up his game with that book. He was a good writer. He was always a good, solid writer who set up his payoffs. He doesn't have sudden Deus Ex Machinas coming in. He's got his plot twists all set up. He does his work in a craftsman-like way. It's like seeing a carpenter make a solid chair, one you can sit in, where the rockers are the same length and the same curvature, and you just know it's a well-made chair, and the joints are put together, fitted well together. And but with Son of the Black Sword, he just stepped his game up, and he's got more character development, more literary themes, more. It's kind of a deeper emotional flavor to it, and even really, and this is the test of a good writer. Even really minor characters have tons of personality, so you can recognize them even if they come on stage very briefly. Now, I'm not a fan of George R.R. Martin's latest book, but his craftsmanship as a writer, he has the same talent. He can make even minor characters, before they're ruthlessly killed off, have tons of personality. He's really good at it. It's not a talent to be underestimated.
Oh yeah, no, it's just the ones he chose to keep and turned me off to that series. But no, actually, what you mentioned about
I got turned off the series because he insulted me personally. So I can't bring myself to read his books anymore. But I'm being noble by saying I still recognize that the muses have visited him with talent, and he's got it. He's got the knack, and I hope he finishes his books. I hope he doesn't that the Grim Reaper doesn't take him away the way it did for the Wheel of Time series, where the author has to kind of hurry up and maybe give the work to something else. That would be terrible.
Yeah. But no, it's actually funny. Sean, actually, Zach Log. Sorry, bud. Gave up your identity.
Now his effectiveness as a crime fighter is going to be compromised. You know that thing. Whereas unlike Reed Richards in Fantastic Four, I don't care if he knows mine. Sorry.
Yeah, Zach actually, he mentioned Correia to me. He was like, "Yeah, it's last thing. It's like, I don't know that much about guns myself, but it struck me as being pretty detailed. You might enjoy it." So I picked him up and was like, "Ha!
I don't know anything about guns, and one of my proudest moments was I actually wrote a Monster Hunter story that appeared in his anthology.
Oh, yeah.
And I know nothing about guns, and I managed to somehow slide one in. And he bought it. It's about the English MI13, the British Secret Service that is charged with hunting down monsters. Was what I did for that.
Well, there was oh crud. Oh yeah, in terms of like over the top action conclusions, I will also mention there's a book I read a couple of years ago called The Golden Transcendence, where the climax takes place on a starship that is under the surface of the sun, which I haven't seen anyone attempt that before. So that's
someone's done it since. There's a book called Superluminary that's just come out from Castalia House, where there are many suns larger than our sun, and in my stories I decided not to use any astronomical wonders that I had to make up. I only use real ones, and so the real star, and I can't remember its name, of Beta Lyrae AA or something, is tremendously larger than our own, large enough that you could fit several Dyson sphere-sized starships in it, and by which I mean something the size of, let's say, the radius of the orbit of the Earth. And so I had a fight between several of them moving slowly through the rarefied. Their sun is less dense than ours because it's so large. But I've got nothing for outrageousness on Doughty E. Smith. If you haven't read the Skylark series, it was written before science fiction really got started in America. And the last book in the series was written like 20 or 30 years later. And in the last book of the series, the super scientist has to make a bargain with the evil super scientist, his enemy, Blackie Kane, to save all of humanity from the horrible chlorine-breathing shape-changer monstrosities from an evil alien galaxy. And what they do is they use their fourth-dimensional machine to teleport stars from one galaxy into the suns of the second galaxy, one at a time by the millions and billions, while teleporting the slave planets of the humans out of the second galaxy and into stable orbits at the correct distance from suns in the third galaxy. And so the entire galaxy is one spiral swath of nuclear, of nova and supernova energy. I've never seen anyone top that.
Wait,
no, I believe the top has officially been found, and it was apparently a while back. And there's just no going over that.
So wait, who were the bad guys in that? Did you say?
I'm gonna write a character who has like this light sucking, like, just Zippo lighter, and if he ever succeeds in lighting it, it's gonna ignite all the dark matter in the universe.
That's also one done. It's called Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's also called Plan 9 from Outer Space, where the humans are going to explode particles of sunlight. And in order to stop them, the flying saucer people had to resurrect the dead in order to scare human beings into believing that UFOs existed, so that they could communicate with them and tell them to not explode the sunlight, because it would cause a chain reaction throughout the entire sidereal universe and destroy absolutely everything.
The hook for my character, though, is going to be he doesn't know what the lighter does, and he just habitually flicks it. He's like, yeah, it's broken. It won't ever light.
And if he gets near too much dark matter, it's going to go off. Who built the lighter, and how did they test it? I think this will destroy a universe. Did Galactus test it? Is that what's going on?
Yeah. But this is all very, very badly thought out. It'd be a Deus Ex Machina.
No. I read that comic. Johnny Storm holds up the lighter in front of Galactus and says, "Back off! Back off!" And Watcher says, "Hand it to him. He will leave Earth now and never trouble you anymore." Yeah, it was a great issue back in the '60s.
Oh, anyway, I've already been beaten to it. Damn it.
Doughty E. Smith, the Skylark series. If you want to read real pulp action that's pulpiest, that's the book to read.
All right.
And it's got one of my favorite villains, Blackie Duquesne, who I completely stole from one of my books. Blackie de Lazar is basically, I just borrowed the name because I steal things.
It's a good name.
It's a great name. It sounds like a 1930s gangster name. Hey, Blackie, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to start an atomic reaction, and soon I will have a monopoly on the element X. That was his motive, by the way. He wanted to create
element X.
Yep. And in the book, it's called Element X.
How would he
causes a chemical reaction? There's an element called Element X in the book that causes a chemical reaction that creates a nuclear disintegration of matter and liberation of energy. Now, Doc Smith was a good enough chemist to know exactly how much energy that would be. He didn't make a mistake like H.G. Wells, whose atomic bomb, when he described it, was like a keg of TNT. He actually knew it would be dramatic. It would be, something you would. The guy has an atomic pistol in this book. I kid you not. He fires a pistol at a target on the horizon, and is flattened by the explosion. They didn't know enough to describe a mushroom cloud, though, because that was before the days when anyone saw the thing in action. He was working completely on the theoretical notion of what it would be like, but he knew enough to know that you need a an atomic bullet would do a lot of damage.
yeah, a little bit. Oh,
so I think we've covered the poem and quite a bit of other subject matter pretty well. And
we're far afield.
We're not, which is fine. I have no objection to that.
Is it too late for me to recommend another poem?
No.
If you haven't read Solomon Kane's Homecoming, same character, same author. It's a great poem. Solomon Kane's Homecoming.
I've heard of that one, and I intend to look that up.
It's got one of my favorite lines in it, so please look it up. It's a great one. It's really good.
But so
it's not as dramatic as this one, but it's good.
So anyway, I think is there any last thing either of you want to throw in?
To the 4 people who actually listen to this, I would like them to go out immediately and buy some of my books, because I'm actually between jobs at the moment, and I need all the financial help I can get. So,
Nate, any parting words? I was gonna say last words. That's right, because I am coming to execute you. We established that.
If either of you has an atomic 6-shooter, they will be last words. It doesn't matter which side fires first.
That's not exactly a good one for 6 paces, is it?
No.
If you're wearing 7-league boots, it might work out.
Now that would be great. That would be great.
No, the only
strange portals that
execute me. I just got one reply.
I'll point out that in the role-playing game Feng Shui, you get a plus 10% chance to hit if you take an extra action rank to pump cock your pump action shotgun and make a ka-chang noise. So
nice.
The player has to actually go ka-chunk like that in order to get the benefit of the dice mechanic.
What's the
There's something to be said for the drama of it all.
Yep.
My actual nightstand gun, nobody gets that sort of warning. It's just they might hear me open the little lockbox, and then it's just gonna be the safety flicking off.
I got kids in my house, so I gotta get like a gun safe and stuff. So if the burglars break in, I'm gonna be busy trying to remember the combination. Was it my birthday or when was I born? Let's see. Neolithic.
Just hang on a minute, dude. Just look. Go rifle through the kitchen or something. I'm getting out the valuables right now for you.
Yeah, but not everyone knows that if you're going to rob a writer, you're not going to find anything valuable in his house.
I know. Let's mug the starving artist. Come on.
That's it. Oh no, I'm not starving. I wish I were. Good Lord. I mean, look at me.
All right. So I think
my wife keeps me nicely fed.
I think we can close off for tonight, and to my audience, I will see you on Monday with the actual poem itself. And
wait, I do have one last question though for the poem. So Solomon Kane is a famous Puritan hero, and Father Brown is a famous detective. So if the Catholic fought the Puritan, who would win? Considering that Father Brown is unarmed and is portly and slow.
Well, it depends if Father Brown has time to psychologically work out what's going on here and expose all of Kane's hidden flaws and
and forgive him. He's
yes,
the only detective who solves crimes in order to forgive them. The answer is Kane would kill him, and Brown would figure out who did it.
And why, which is often the more important part.
Sorry for that remark. That actually made no sense. I'm just wasting your time at this point.
I think that's the whole night. All right. Well, I'm going to close off the live stream.